Rain had ended only minutes ago, but the market still shone like a wound beneath the gray sky. Brine Court pulsed with the hum of generators and the hiss of steam from cracked vents. Glass floors slick with puddles, reflecting the thin outlines of people moving between stalls. The smell was a heavy mix of fried tide fruit, metal, and sea brine that burned faintly in the back of the throat. Rowan Hale moved through it all with the same measured step he used on the terrace's steady, deliberate, unhurried. He was a man carved by labor rather than talk, built broad and brown by years under salt wind and ultraviolet lamps. His clothes were clean but plain. Dark work pants, boots with dried salt at the seams, and a water-resistant vest marked with the small badge of Tylos Agricultural Steward. District 3. The mark was enough to make vendors nod in acknowledgement, but not enough to make them friendly. Farmers didn't draw crowds. They fed them. Rowan preferred it that way. He'd learned to live by simple rules. Work, trade, return. Noise was for people who hadn't lost anything worth keeping quiet for. Halfway down the southern row, he caught the stench before he saw her. Chemical wrongness that cut through the air like burned plastic. It made heads turn, noses wrinkle. Bloom rot, someone muttered. From the tunnels, the crowd shifted, leaving a gap near the closed spice stall where she stood. She didn't hide. She didn't move. Her skin glimmered faintly under the gray light, smooth violet tinted with thin blue veins near the surface, the mark of the reef-born. Her long green hair hung in soaked strands down her back, tangled with grime. A shredded tide-wrapped skirt clung to her hips, and a torn microfiber shawl half covered one shoulder. She looked like a ghost dragged out of the sea and left standing in the noise. Yet her eyes clear, green, sharp, were steady. No pleading, no shame. When Rowan's gaze met hers, the space between them felt stripped of everything else. The laughter, the voices, the smell. Just two people who'd both learned what it meant to be left behind. "You have water at home," she said. Her voice was low, hoarse, but controlled. "I need a wash, clothes, food." Not a plea, a statement. The nearby vendors laughed, the sound metallic and mean. "Take her, farmer. She keep the gulls off your roof." Someone spat. Another covered his nose. Nara didn't look at them. She only looked at Rowan, still waiting, as if the outcome was already written. He studied her longer than he meant to. Her posture was iron wrapped in exhaustion. He recognized the tremor in her hands, the same one he'd seen in people who'd stayed strong too long. The kind that meant fear had turned into fatigue, and there was nothing left but endurance. "What happened?" he asked finally. "Waste bloom ruptured near my camp," she said. "Got into my glands. It'll fade after a purge." That explained the smell. He knew bloom infection. He'd carried victims once, back when the cores still mattered. The laughter around him sharpened. Someone said, "Don't touch her. You'll rot too." Rowan's jaw flexed. He should have kept walking. He wasn't a rescuer anymore. But his hands tightened on the crate at his side, and before he could talk himself out of it, he said, "Follow me." She blinked once, startled, then straightened. "Your rules or mine?" "Mine," he said. "No lies. No trouble." "Fine," she murmured. "Just don't leave me out here." The crowd parted as they passed, some muttering, others staring. Laughter followed them again, brittle and small. Nara walked beside him, barefoot on the slick glass, her steps precise despite the tremor. When they crossed the archway to the terraces, the air changed, the metallic tong giving way to the clean, steady hum of the pumps that fed the upper farms. Below, the sea moved in heavy swells, slate-colored and endless. His house stood at the far edge of the slope, white ceramic walls streaked by rain, light from the hydro bays glowing behind translucent panels. Inside, The air smelled of saltgrass and machine oil. He set his crate down and pointed to the wash bay. "There," he said. She hesitated, then walked forward, still proud even in ruin. "The purge hurts," he warned. "So does infection," she replied. He turned the valve, and white foam hissed out, coating her arms, her chest, her face. She gasped, but didn't cry out. The smell thickened, then slowly faded. When it was done, she stood shaking, eyes red, skin clean. Rowan handed her a towel and one of his shirts, long and soft from wear. "Put this on." She nodded, wrapping the fabric around herself like armor. The shirt hung loose on her frame, the hem brushing her thighs. She caught him looking not at her body, but at her steadiness, and looked away. "Food?" she asked quietly. He poured 2 mugs of bitter coffee and said, "After you understand the rules. You work, you tell the truth, and you stay respectful. You break any of those, you leave." Her voice softened. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You're still standing." For the first time, a shadow of a smile flickered across her face, small, tired, but real. Outside, fog rolled back in from the sea, and the hum of the terrace pumps filled the silence. Somewhere far below, laughter still echoed from Brine Court. Faint and distant now, like a memory of something already losing its power. Morning came gray and wet. The kind of light that turned the tide-glass terraces into mirrors reflecting the clouds above. Rowan Hale rose before dawn, as always, checking the nutrient gauges, the pump valves, the temperature regulators that kept the crops alive through the night chill. The hum of machines filled the farmhouse like a low heartbeat. He found comfort in it, predictable, controlled, alive, without needing words. When he turned toward the heater, he saw movement. Nara, sitting near the wall, wrapped in his old towel, hair hanging loose and damp against her shoulders. Clean now, she looked almost unrecognizable from the girl in the market. Her violet skin had softened to a faint shimmer under the glow of the grow lights, and her eyes, though still guarded, were calm. She looked like she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. "You're awake early," he said quietly. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, voice raw but steadier. "The floor vibrates." "The terrace pumps," he said. "A run under the slab. Feels like the ground's breathing," she murmured. "I haven't felt that in weeks." Rowan didn't answer. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. She took it carefully, sniffed it, then sipped. The taste made her flinch. "It's bitter. That's how you know it's real," he said. She almost smiled, but hid it behind the mug. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Not hostile, not awkward, just quiet. Then he asked, "You said you worked the lower reefs?" "Yes," she said. "Mapping currents for the Reclamation Guild. Before the bloom." He nodded slowly. "Then you can help here. Start with the terrace checks." Her brow furrowed. "You're putting me to work already? You said you'd pull your weight. You really don't like rest, do you?" She asked, half teasing. "Work keeps people grounded. And you?" "It keeps me from remembering." The answer made her fall silent. She drank the rest of her coffee in small sips, as though tasting each second before it passed. Outside, fog hung over the terraces, thin as breath. They crossed the glass bridge together, footsteps echoing softly against the panels. The sea below was restless, shifting in green and silver folds. The wind caught Nara's hair, and she brushed it aside impatiently. "You used to be military," she said. "Rescue Corps," he corrected. "Long time ago. What happened?" "Bad timing," he said simply. "Worse command." She didn't press. She had her own ghosts. When they reached the first water valve, Rowan crouched and checked the readings on the monitor. Salinity's too high, he muttered. We'll lose the upper trays if it spikes again. Nara knelt beside him, dipping her fingers into the trickling stream. The sensors are wrong, she said. The mix is colder on the left channel. There's a blockage. Rowan paused, watching her. You can tell that by touch? You learn when the sea tries to kill you every day, she said. He adjusted the valve, following her direction, and the gauge stabilized immediately. He gave a small, approving nod. You've got good hands. She shrugged. You've got good machines. They worked in silence after that, cleaning filters, resetting pressure lines. Every motion was mechanical, rhythmic, like a kind of unspoken conversation. By the time the fog began to lift, the terrace gleamed with fresh water, flowing evenly through the trays. When they walked back to the house, Rowan noticed she wasn't walking behind him anymore. She was beside him. Inside, he cooked again reef stag strips from the freezer, warmed with citrus salt. The smell filled the air, sharp and clean. Nara sat at the table, fingers tracing faint patterns on the surface, as though she were mapping invisible currents. Why'd you help me yesterday? She asked finally. You didn't know me. Didn't need to. Most people don't need to do anything, he said. That's how the world rots. She studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. You sound like someone who's tried to fix it before. I used to, he admitted. Didn't work. And now? Now I fix what's in front of me. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. They ate in quiet. When she finished, she rose to rinse her plate. The simple gesture made something tighten in his chest. Reminder of what it felt like to have another person in a space built for one. You live alone, she said. Easier that way, he replied. No family? Not anymore. His tone made her stop asking. She looked at the framed photo on the far shelf, 3 figures in rescue uniforms, soaked, grinning, one of them clearly him. She turned back to the sink without a word. The rest of the day passed in calm routine. She wiped surfaces, folded towels, checked hydrolights without being told. By evening, the house no longer felt sterile. The hum of the machines seemed warmer, somehow softer. As the sun fell beyond the waterline, she stood by the window, watching the distant lights of Brine Court flicker through the fog. They'll be talking about you, she said quietly. About taking me in. Let them, Rowan said, adjusting the lamp. They don't decide what I do. She looked over her shoulder. You're not afraid? I've been afraid of worse things than gossip. The silence that followed was full, not empty, 2 people listening to the same hum, the same sea. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. If I keep your rules, how long can I stay? As long as you don't lie to me. She nodded once, slowly, like a promise forming in the air between them. Then I'll stay. Rowan met her eyes for a moment, saw the honesty there, the exhaustion and the defiance stitched together, and felt something shift in him. Outside, night folded over the terraces. Inside, the lights dimmed, the hum steadied, and for the first time in years, the quiet in Rowan Hale's house didn't feel like solitude. It felt like the beginning of something living. Dawn broke slow and pale, the kind of gray light that softened every edge of the tide-glass terraces and turned the sea below into a mirror of quiet motion. Rowan Hale was already outside, adjusting the upper feed valves when he heard soft footsteps behind him. Nara stood barefoot on the glass walkway, wrapped in his old shirt and a clean tide-wrap skirt, her hair braided tight against the morning wind. The air smelled faintly of salt and metal, the scent of working life. She stepped closer, careful not to slip on the damp surface. You start early, she said, her breath visible in the cool air. Crops don't wait, he replied, checking the gauge. If we're late, the pressure drops and the pumps flood. You talk to them like they're alive, she said. They are, he answered. They breathe, eat light, and die if neglected. Same as anything else worth saving. She watched him for a long second, then crouched beside him without asking. Her fingers moved quickly, testing the valve seal, her touch practiced. This section's uneven, she said. Flow's splitting wrong. Rowan turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. You've done this before? Not with plants, she said, but water always tells the truth. They worked side by side in silence, the wind tugging at their sleeves, the hum of pumps blending with the distant cry of gulls. She didn't complain when the cold spray hit her hands, or when her knees pressed against the slick surface. Rowan noticed. He also noticed the faint golden trace of scars along her wrists, the kind that came from rope or restraint. He didn't ask. When the valve finally steadied and the stream smoothed, Nara leaned back on her heels, breath misting. You like control, she said quietly. That's why you farm. Things obey you here. Rowan tightened the gauge without looking at her. Control keeps people alive. Or it keeps them from feeling alive, she countered. The words hung in the air like fog, and for a moment he had no answer. He rose, brushing water from his gloves, and handed her a small sensor unit. If you're staying, you'll learn the systems. We'll start with moisture regulation. And if I break something, then you fix it, he said. Same rule as life. Her lips curved faintly. You make everything sound simple. It usually is, he said. People just complicate it. When they returned to the farmhouse, the scent of heated saltgrass filled the air. Rowan cooked while Nara recorded readings into the console, her brow furrowed in concentration. The numbers scrolled across the screen, reflected faintly in her green eyes. You trust me with this? She asked without looking up. I trust what I see, he said. And you don't see a risk? Not the kind that matters. That answer made her pause. Trust was a word she hadn't heard in months, maybe years. She didn't say it, but something in her posture softened. The day stretched long and quiet. They worked the terraces, recalibrated pumps, adjusted nutrient lines. Rowan found himself talking more than he meant to small things about flow patterns, the old core's methods, the way storms bent current lines. Nara listened, memorizing everything. By midday, sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the sea below them into a patchwork of silver and green. She leaned over the railing, hair whipped by wind, eyes reflecting the horizon. You ever leave? She asked. Go back to the mainland? No reason to, he said. Everything I need's here. That sounds like hiding. Maybe it is, he said. But I've seen what's out there. I prefer this. You sound like someone who's still trying to convince himself. He almost smiled. You sound like someone who doesn't know when to stop talking. She laughed softly, the sound small but warm, carried away by the wind. It was the first laugh he'd heard in the house in years, and it changed something like a hairline crack in stone letting in sunlight. They returned inside when the wind picked up again. Nara hung her wet shawl near the heater and sank into the seat by the grow wall. Back home, she said, we used to sing when the storm season came. Not for comfort, just to hear something stronger than the wind. You sing? He asked, surprised. Not anymore, she said. I stopped when there was no one left to hear it. He didn't push. He only said, then you'll have to start again someday. Maybe, she said, eyes unfocused. When the world feels safe enough to deserve it. The silence that followed was deep but not empty. Outside, rain began to fall again, slow and rhythmic, tracing silver lines down the glass walls. Rowan watched her reflection in the window, the calm strength behind the exhaustion, and realized he'd stopped listening for the quiet. He was listening for her. That evening, When the rain eased, he took her to the far end of the terrace. Brine Court's lights shimmered faintly across the water, distant but bright. "We'll go back there soon," he said. "Supplies are low." Her expression flickered between fear and pride. "They'll laugh again. Then don't let them see it matters." "You make it sound easy." "It is," he said. "They only win if you flinch." She looked at him then, really looked. "And you?" she asked. "Do you ever flinch?" He turned toward the dark sea, voice low. "Only when I start caring again." She didn't answer, but the way she stood beside him, silent and steady, said enough. For the first time, she wasn't the girl from the tunnels or the refugee from the bloom. She was part of the rhythm of the terrace, the hum of machines, the breath of the sea, the quiet pulse of a place beginning to remember. It was alive. The storm came in sudden and hard, rolling over the horizon like a gray wall. By the time the first gust hit the terraces, the glass panels were trembling under the weight of the wind. Rowan Hale moved fast, securing the outer pump gates, his coat flapping against his legs. The sea below had turned violent, waves slamming against the pylons in white bursts of spray. Overhead, the sky was nothing but smoke-colored turbulence, the air thick with salt and static. He'd weathered 100 storms, but this one felt wrong off cycle, heavier than it should have been. Pressure's dropping too fast. Nara shouted, her voice barely carrying over the howl of wind. She was already at the control panel, hair whipping loose from its braid, fingers moving over the wet screen. "Main valves aren't responding." "They're jammed," Rowan said, crouching beside her. "Manual override now." She looked at him, rain streaking her face. "That'll flood the lower beds. If we don't, we'll lose the whole terrace." She didn't hesitate again. They ran along the glass walkway, water pooling beneath their boots, lightning flashing across the surface like fractured veins of light. The hum of machinery deepened into a groan, pumps straining against the storm surge. Nara's hands were slick as she gripped the valve wheel. Together they forced it open, the metal shrieking in protest before finally turning. A torrent of water surged through the pipes, spilling over the emergency drains. The reading stabilized by a fraction. "That's one," she gasped. "3 more." Rowan nodded, breath heavy, moving to the next junction. The wind drove rain sideways, cold and sharp like needles. He could feel the vibration under his feet, the storm pressing on the structure itself. Nara stumbled once, catching herself on the railing, and he reached out without thinking, steadying her. "You good?" he asked. "I'm not breaking before your machines do," she shouted back. Lightning flashed again, revealing the raw determination in her face. And for a moment, he saw not a refugee or a stranger, but someone who refused to yield to a world that had already tried to drown her. They reached the final valve near the terrace edge, where the sea roared just meters below. As Nara bent to adjust the release, a metallic clang echoed through the rain. Rowan turned sharply and saw it. A panel near the pump base pried open, wires cut, circuits exposed. Sabotage. "Someone's been here," he said. "Recently." "Who would?" she started, but the words vanished in the thunder. He yanked a toolkit from his belt and dropped to one knee, patching the severed line. "The Guild," she said suddenly, realization breaking through the noise. "They sent inspectors last week to check for contamination. They must have rigged it. To what end?" "To fail," she said bitterly. "Then they could call it negligence and seize your license." Rowan swore under his breath. "You could have told me." She hesitated, jaw tightening. "You wouldn't have let me stay if you knew they were after me." He looked up at her through the rain, eyes steady despite the chaos. "You should have trusted me. I stopped trusting when people stopped surviving because of it. Then start again." He reconnected the final line, sparks jumping in the downpour. The system whined back to life, gauges stabilizing. A deep hum spread through the terrace floor, alive again. Nara dropped beside him, chest heaving, water streaming down her arms. "It's done," she said. "For now," he replied. They sat there for a moment, breathing hard, surrounded by the roar of rain and the endless surge of waves. The wind carried the faint scent of ozone and salt, and something else burned circuitry. "You could have left," she said finally. "Walked away when it broke." "And go where?" he asked, his tone even. "This is my ground. My mess to fix, even when someone else caused it. Especially then." She looked at him, eyes bright under the stormlight. "You really don't quit?" "No," he said quietly. "I just don't run anymore." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by thunder. Nara reached out, resting her hand on his wrist, fingers trembling but firm. "The bloom wasn't an accident," she said softly. "They dumped waste from the upper cities into our channels. When we exposed them, they burned the camps. I was the only one left." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his gaze did, an old wound reopening under new skin. "You're saying this storm isn't just weather?" "It's a cover," she said. "They're finishing what they started." "Not tonight," he said. He rose and extended a hand to her. "Come on. We hold until dawn." She took his hand. Lightning split the sky above them, and for an instant their reflections glowed in the wet glass, two silhouettes against the fury of the sea. Together they worked through the night, sealing leaks, rerouting flow, patching lines. Every movement became instinct, every breath synchronization. By the time the storm began to break, both of them were soaked, exhausted, but alive. The terrace still stood. The machine still hummed. When the first faint light of morning broke through the clouds, Rowan leaned against the railing, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. Nara stood beside him, watching the sun rise through the mist. "You should have walked away," she said again, softer this time. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I didn't want to." She turned toward him, eyes unreadable. "Why?" "Because you didn't." The wind quieted then, leaving only the rhythmic pulse of the pumps and the soft sound of water dripping from their clothes. For the first time, neither of them felt like survivors clinging to ruin. They felt like a team, two people who had fought the sea and each other's ghosts and found something still standing when the storm passed. When they finally went back inside, Rowan poured 2 mugs of coffee with shaking hands. Nara took hers, steam rising between them. "You said trust had to start somewhere," she said. "Does this count?" "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "It does." Outside, the storm rolled farther out to sea, and for the first time since the day they met, Rowan realized the quiet didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like peace earned the hard way. The days after the storm settled into a heavy quiet, the kind that carried both relief and unease. Mist clung low to the tide-glass terraces, turning everything into a washed-out reflection of itself. The air smelled of salt, metal, and something faintly sweet from the regrown algae beds. Rowan Hale stood on the main bridge, eyes fixed on the readout of his handheld monitor. And numbers blinked steady now. Pumps stable. Flow balanced. Against all odds, the terraces had survived. Behind him, Nara was kneeling near the outer edge, scraping salt residue from a cracked glass panel. Her green hair was tied back again, but loose strands danced in the damp air. She worked with quiet focus, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scars catching the light. Every few moments she'd pause, glance toward the sea, then return to her task. There was purpose in her movements now, the same kind of rhythm Rowan recognized in people who'd stopped waiting for rescue and started rebuilding instead. "How's the intake?" He called out. "Flow's clean," she said. I recalibrated the West pipe manually. You recalibrated it? He frowned, lowering his monitor. You're not supposed to what? She interrupted, turning toward him. Know what I'm doing? Her tone wasn't defensive. It was sharp, alive. He watched her for a moment, then gave a small, reluctant smile. Seems you do. Good, she said. You can stop worrying about me breaking your machines. Worrying isn't the same as doubting. Feels the same from where I stand, she said, and bent back to her work. He didn't argue. Instead, he walked toward her, boots clicking on wet glass. You said the guild caused the bloom, he began. She didn't look up. I did, and we need proof. That made her pause. You believe me? I've seen enough to know truth doesn't need my belief. What would you do with proof? Fix it, he said simply. Expose them. She laughed once, short and humorless. That's not fixing. That's suicide. Maybe, he said. But if you're right, I can't farm on poisoned water forever. She stared at him then, really seeing the conviction in his face. You mean to help me? I mean to stop hiding, he said. That's not the same thing. She stood, brushing salt from her hands. If I map the currents, trace the contamination lines, we'll have evidence. But I'll need your equipment and your trust. You already have both. The way he said, it left no room for doubt. That night, the farmhouse filled with soft light and the faint buzz of sensors. Nara spread sheets of old tide charts across the table, marking points with a salvage stylus. Rowan set up a data reader, linking the terrace flow logs to her sketches. The hum of the machines became their language. The guild altered the pump routes, she said, tracing a circle on the map. They redirected waste channels into the old reclamation lines. That's where the bloom started. So they used the same infrastructure you once mapped, Rowan said, and blamed you for the failure. She nodded, jaw tight. They called us careless, said we contaminated ourselves. Then they shut the lower reefs down. Rowan leaned closer, following her hand across the map. If we rechart it, we can show the contamination's origin. And who caused it, she added. We can send it to the independents on the outer coast. They'll spread it faster than any guild feed. You'll be marked, he warned. You already are, she said quietly. For a long while, neither spoke. The lamps glowed warm against the window glass, throwing their shadows across the table, his tall, steady silhouette beside hers, smaller but burning with intent. All right, he said finally. Let's finish it. They worked through the night. Rain returned in thin streaks against the windows, but it was gentle this time, not violent. Nara's hands moved quickly, translating old instincts into precision. Rowan monitored the sensor feeds, correcting for magnetic drift. Their words were few, but the silence between them had changed, less guarded, more shared. When the first light crept over the horizon, the map was done. Lines of blue and red ink traced across the surface like veins of a living thing. Nara leaned back, exhausted but smiling faintly. There, she said. That's everything they tried to erase. Rowan studied the map. You've done more than fix it, he said. You've given the sea a voice again. She looked at him, her expression softening. You talk like it's alive. It is, he said. And so are you. Her breath caught just slightly, but she didn't look away. You should rest, he said finally. We'll transmit the data after dawn. You trust me to send it? I trust you to finish what you start. She stood slowly, fatigue pulling at her limbs. And you? What do you start? Maybe something that makes the noise worth it again. He meant it as a simple answer, but she heard what he didn't say. When she moved past him toward her corner, her hand brushed his arm, deliberate this time, not by accident. Neither spoke. The contact was brief, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. By noon, the transmission was sent anonymously, encrypted, unstoppable. The guild's secrets were on their way to the outer coast. That evening, Rowan grilled reef stag again, this time with citrus slices and crushed salt pods. The scent filled the house, warm and sharp. They ate facing each other in the quiet hum of machines, the kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. "You realize," she said between bites, "we just declared war." "Then let's hope we win," he replied. "And if we don't?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Then at least we stopped pretending." The glow from the grow walls caught in her eyes as she smiled, small, real, defiant. When the night deepened and the sea outside shimmered under the returning moonlight, Rowan found himself watching her reflection beside his in the glass. Two survivors who had stopped waiting for rescue. The storm had passed, but what it left behind was stronger than either of them alone. The morning after they sent the transmission, the world felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just alive in a new way, as if the sea itself had been waiting for someone to speak the truth again. Mist rolled across the tide-glass terraces, soft and silver, and sunlight scattered through it in thin, wavering ribbons. Rowan Hale stood by the open door, the smell of salt and clean air filling his chest. Behind him, Nara moved through the house with quiet purpose, packing instruments into a small case. Her bare feet made no sound on the floor, but he could hear the faint hum she always carried when she worked, a low tone under her breath, almost like the sea murmuring through a shell. "You're sure they'll see it?" she asked, glancing toward him. "The data, the maps?" "They'll see," he said. "And they'll understand. You did it right." "We did," she corrected. She slung the case over her shoulder and joined him at the doorway. From where they stood, the terraces stretched out like shards of glass floating above the ocean. Every surface glistened from the night's mist. Workers on neighboring farms were already out, tending pumps and scrubbing filters. A few of them looked up as Rowan and Nara passed. There were no whispers now, no mocking laughs, just brief, uncertain nods. "Feels strange," she said quietly. "No one laughing anymore." "They will again," Rowan replied. "People always need something to point at." "Then let them point," she said. "At least now they'll know what we did." He looked at her, admiration softening his face. "You sound like you've done this before." "I've spent my whole life proving I'm not what they think," she said. "But this time, I'm not doing it alone." They walked across the terrace bridge toward Brine Court. The market had changed since the day he first saw her there. The smell of oil and brine still hung heavy, but the air felt cleaner somehow. Fewer guards, fewer guild banners. The hum of voices was softer, cautious. When they reached the center aisle, heads turned, but this time not in disgust. Recognition, curiosity, even respect lingered in those glances. Rowan stopped at the same vendor's stall where the laughter had started weeks ago. The man behind it shifted awkwardly, pretending to organize jars of Tide salt. "Morning," Rowan said calmly. "Need 2 sacks of prism feed." "Of course, Steward Hale," the vendor stammered. "And," his eyes flicked to Nara, "the lady?" "My partner," Rowan said, and the word carried through the air like a quiet declaration. The vendor hesitated, then nodded quickly, no trace of mockery in his face. He filled the order in silence. When they turned to leave, a voice broke through the crowd, a familiar one, sharp and oily. "Well, look at that. The farmer and his sea trash." It was the same man from before, the one who taunted her in the rain. His grin wavered when Rowan turned toward him. "Say that again," Rowan said quietly. "What, her name?" Rowan cut in. "Say it." The man's eyes darted around, searching for allies that weren't there. Nara stepped forward, voice clear. "It's Nara. You remember it now. You'll need it when you ask me to fix your broken pumps." Laughter rippled through the nearby stalls, but this time it wasn't cruel. It was aimed at him. The man's mouth opened and closed once before he turned away, muttering. The laughter faded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a strange, heavy respect. Rowan glanced at Nara. "You didn't need me that time." "You didn't need to stop me either," she said. "We're learning." They walked back through the market, the crowd parting for them without a word. When they reached the archway that led to the terraces, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet stone and rain. The storm clouds from the outer sea were moving in again, slow and dark on the horizon. Nara stopped, staring out across the water. "You think they'll come?" she asked. "The guild?" "Eventually," Rowan said. "But not the way you think." "Then how?" "They'll come to buy what they can't control." She smiled faintly. "And we'll charge double." "Triple," he said, and she laughed a real laugh this time, bright and easy. It caught him off guard how natural it sounded here, in the place that once smelled of mockery and rot. Back at the house, the air was warm with the scent of cooked reef stag and dried citrus. Rowan worked at the stove, while Nara sorted through the data logs, marking transmission confirmations. "You've heard from them," he said, nodding toward the console. "3 responses," she said. "Outer Coast, Ridge Colonies, and 1 from the Deep Salvage Outpost. They verified everything. And the guild's collapsing. Their permits suspended. Their chairman resigned this morning." She turned in her seat, eyes bright. "You realize what this means?" "It means you did it," he said softly. "No." She shook her head. "It means we both did." He didn't argue. Instead, he set 2 plates on the table. They ate quietly, listening to the steady hum of the terrace pumps below. When the meal ended, Nara reached for the small perfume vial that still sat on the counter. She dabbed a drop on her wrist, the clean scent of sea glass spreading through the room. "You kept it," Rowan said. "I like the smell," she replied. "Reminds me that the worst things can wash off." "Not all of them," he said. "Some just fade until they stop hurting." "And you?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "Have yours faded yet?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not all. But some things make the noise easier to live with." "Like what?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Like you." The room fell still, the hum of the machines softening into the background. Nara rose from her seat and crossed the floor, stopping in front of him. "Then stop living with noise," she said. "Start living with me?" She reached up, her fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. He didn't move away this time. The kiss that followed wasn't sudden or desperate. It was inevitable, the slow uncoiling of everything they'd been building since the first night in the rain. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. "You know they'll still laugh," she whispered. "Then let them," he said. "They laughed before, too. But look what came of it." Outside, the tide began to rise, waves rolling gently against the pylons below. The horizon glowed with pale gold as the first light broke through the clouds. Rowan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer as they looked out at the sea-2 figures reflected in the tide glass. No longer strangers, no longer outcasts. Somewhere deep in the water, unseen currents carried the remnants of their signal to every coast that needed to hear it. The city would remember them now, not for the laughter, but for what followed, the day a farmer and an outcast changed the current of a world too used to silence.